Perfect. Thank you, Addie. And that way we can post this to the website in the coming days. So for folks who weren't able to attend, or if you want to go back and listen again, you're more than welcome to. It's nice to see so many folks on the webinar today. Commerce is very excited to release this funding round. This is a little bit different of a funding round than our typical early learning facilities program that you may be aware of. This is money specifically for minor renovations at childcare buildings. Providers don't have to increase capacity to apply like the ELF grant. And the focus is really on minor renovations that don't result in structural changes to the building. And we will get into all of that more during our webinar today. We have several slides, both about how to apply for one of these grants, and also several slides that talk about the eligible and ineligible grant costs with this program. So we're excited to be with you here today to share information about this grant, which opens up March 3rd. We'll all have some slides to share today to talk about the grant, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. So feel free, if you want, to put your questions into the Q&A icon there in Zoom. We'll keep an eye on those, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll go through that list of Q&A questions and then answer those. We have a lot of folks on today's webinar, so we may not get to all of the Q&A, but if you're able to put your question in the Q&A, then we'll make a note of it, and we plan on creating an FAQ document from this webinar with your questions and your answers. So if we can't answer everything today, we will certainly provide an answer soon and post it on our website along with this webinar. We're not planning on taking any live questions today just because of the number of folks, and we don't think we'll get to everything in the Q&A, but we have our contact info on the last slide, and you're also more than welcome to shoot us an email anytime with questions on the grant. Right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to start off by noting that at the Department of Commerce, we strengthen communities. And one of the ways we strengthen communities is by helping childcare providers thrive and prosper. And with that, I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Tanya Mercer, who's going to talk about some of the highlights from our program guidelines.
Thanks, Matt. Welcome, everyone. So now we'll go over some highlights of the program guidelines. The program guidelines can be found on the Early Learning Facilities webpage. This document is very important to understanding the program and should be referenced when seeking to know more about the requirements that come with accepting the federal funding being offered through the Department of Commerce's Early Learning Facilities program. We always post our most current program guidelines to the webpage, so you should be able to access this document throughout your experience working with Commerce. The program guidelines are meant to help an awardee of these funds understand what will be expected of them in order to get under contract for the grant, how to access and use the funds, and how to maintain compliance throughout the contract term. So now I'm going to show you how to find the program guidelines on our website. What you will want to do is go to any web browser And so for here, I'm using Chrome, and so mine opens up automatically into Google. You'll go up into the URL section and you'll type commerce.wa.gov. Hit enter, and that takes you to the Commerce main webpage. From here, you'll click on this link, which is in the upper menu bar called the Program Index. And this takes you to an index of all the programs offered at the Department of Commerce. We'll be looking for the Early Learning Facilities program. So if you move down through the page, these are alphabetized, and you go to E, you'll find the Early Learning Facilities program. Click on this link, and this takes you to our program's specific webpage. So on this webpage, there's a lot of information. The first thing I'm going to show you is where to find the current information for this application funding round. So if you move down through the page, you'll come to this section called the 2022 Federal Funding Child Care Minor Renovations Grant. And here, what you'll find is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. This is another document that's very important to this application funding round. You'll want to take a look at this because this gives you the specific information related to the requirements in order to apply for the funding. You'll find the program guidelines, which is what I'm now talking about. Click on this link and this opens a PDF to the program guidelines. You can print the program guidelines from this webpage. You can save a copy to your desktop. So I highly recommend that if you have not oriented yourself to our webpage, you do that today and get acquainted with our program guidelines. And then also in this section is a frequently asked questions document. So from prior funding rounds where we thought those questions might be applicable, we took those questions, provided answers, and we've created a document and posted it here to our webpage. After this webinar today, we'll also post another frequently asked questions document with answers to those questions. So if we don't get to your question today, you should be able to find information on our webpage related to questions that are being asked during this webinar. You'll also see that we have had the documents, all of the documents, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the program guidelines, and the frequently asked questions document. We've had those translated into Spanish and also Somali. And then further down, you'll see that we have the webinar links. So today, obviously right now, we're having the English version of this webinar. On March 1st, we'll have a Spanish version of this webinar. And then later this afternoon, we'll have a Somali language version of this webinar. So if you are wanting to see this presentation in Spanish or Somali, I do strongly suggest that you sign up for those presentations and then attend those webinars as well. And then just a little quick orientation to this webpage. So coming back up here to the top, you'll see that we've posted all of the RCWs and the legislative language related to this program. We always post the most current program guidelines related to the funding rounds. So here under program guidelines, you'll see links to the eligible organizations funding round, which just closed. You'll see the K-12 school district funding round, which closed last summer. And then you'll see the direct appropriation guidelines, which those funding opportunities come to us directly from the legislature. And then when this current funding round closes, the federal funding round, we will also keep a copy of the program guidelines posted to this webpage in this section. We also post a bunch of different information here, so you can see previously awarded projects. We have a report to the legislature that we keep posted to this webpage. Our program staff contact information is listed on this webpage. We also list our partners' contact information, and our partners are great resources for technical assistance. So that includes the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, as well as Enterprise Community Partners. And then we have other links related to other resources that you might find helpful. If you've never visited this webpage and you would like to get continuous updates about the program, I do recommend that you come to the webpage, enter your email address here in this section where it says sign up for updates. And if you submit your email address to us, you will receive ongoing updates about the program, upcoming funding opportunities, and all kinds of other information. So again, if you have never been to this website, I do strongly suggest that you come and visit it and get yourself oriented. So now I will stop sharing the web page And Matt, if you can continue sharing the presentation, we'll keep going with that.
Great. Thank you, Tanya.
Very welcome.
Okay.
All right. So a little bit more about the program guidelines. Many of you have possibly previously received funds through DCYF to cover renovation costs. The grant funds from the Early Learning Facility Program have different requirements than the funds from the DCYF program. Because this grant funding is coming through the ELF program, the state's capital project requirements must be followed. One of the most important program requirements you'll want to know about is that the grant will be paid out as a reimbursement for costs incurred by the awardee. This means we cannot pay forward or pay up front any of the grant to an awardee for costs that have not been incurred as of the award letter date. This also means in most cases, the grant will not be paid out as a lump sum payment. Grant funds will be paid out once the awardee is under contract with Commerce. And we're going to go through that a little bit more as this presentation progresses. So in order to get under contract, an awardee will need to complete the program's pre-contracting process. The requirements include providing a UBI number from the Washington State Department of Revenue. This is your Washington State business license information. You'll be providing us an SWV number from the Office of Financial Management. If you currently do not have one, once you get an award, you will need to apply for an SWV number from the Washington State Office of Financial Management. This allows us to pay you grant funds. You'll also need to provide proof of licensure or certification from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families that the site is a licensed childcare facility. You'll need to provide proof of site control, either in the form of a deed, which means that you own the property, or in the form of a lease, which means that you're leasing the property from someone. You'll need to provide one of those documents to us. You'll need to provide proof of project feasibility, and this can include final cost estimates, construction bids, and other planning and development related documents for the capital project. You'll also need to provide proof of commitment of other funding needed to complete the project, if applicable. So if other funds are necessary in order to complete the project that you're applying for, in addition to this grant, you'll need to show us that you have that other funding committed before we will get under contract with you. And then finally, you'll also need to provide proof of insurance. That proof of insurance could include property insurance, commercial general liability insurance, and fidelity insurance. Once we start going through the pre-contracting process with an awardee, we use a risk assessment to determine what levels of insurance will be required for the grant. So more information will be provided to awardees once you get to that stage in our pre-contracting. In addition to the above, applicants also need to be aware that awardees of this grant will need to comply with the Governor's Executive Order 2102. This order requires all capital projects to be reviewed by the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and also all potentially impacted tribes to determine if there will be impacts of cultural significance. Commerce does not make the determination if a project must be reviewed by DAP or a tribe. Only those entities can determine if a review will be required. You will need to submit documentation to DAP and communication to a tribe in order to determine how much further coordination will be necessary with those entities. Consulting with DAP and all potentially impacted tribes must occur as early in the process as possible and will need to be completed before we can enter into contract to release the grant funds. Once an award is made, the awardee will be provided more direction on how to get started with the DAP and tribal coordination. Although there is information in the program guidelines that you should take a look at so you can understand what will be expected of you if you receive an award from us. If an awardee has begun demolition, infrastructure work, construction, renovation, or remodeling prior to receiving our award, the project must still undergo the DAP and tribal reviews upon receiving our award. This may mean that construction will be halted until the reviews are completed. If a construction project is currently underway or will be started before an award is made, it would be a good idea to start the review processes now. If you find yourself in this situation, There are directions in the program guidelines for how you may proceed in contacting DAP and tribes, or you can reach out to ELF program staff for further guidance. Another capital project requirement that you may not be familiar with is complying with the Leadership in Energy and Environment Design building standards. We call this LEED. The LEED standard is a high-performance green building standard. Capital projects must either be waived from the LEED standard or be built to it. To comply with this requirement, we have developed a form that our awardees must complete, and this helps us determine if your project will be waived from the LEED standard or if you will need to comply with this building requirement. Most ELF program funded projects are determined waived from LEED standard, but you must complete the LEED documentation before it can be determined if your project will be waived. This determination must be made before we can enter into a contract to release the grant funds. Once an award is made, the awardee will be provided more direction on how to complete the LEED documentation. Although there is information in the program guidelines that you should take a look at so you can understand what will be expected of you if you receive an award. If an awardee has begun construction prior to receiving our award, the project must still receive a LEED review by Commerce. This may mean that the construction will need to be halted until the review is complete. And if a construction project is currently underway or will be started before an award is made, it would be a good idea to start the review process now.
Tanya, the slides aren't changing. It's still on program highlights.
That's fine. There's only one slide.
Okay, thank you.
So if a construction project is underway, you'll want to take a look at the program guidelines and make sure you understand next steps for complying with our LEED requirement. If you have any questions and you need to get started before the award is made on that review, please do reach out to the Early Learning Facilities program staff for further guidance. Recipients of this funds may also be required to comply with the state's public works statutes to include contracting and subcontracting requirements for the construction work, paying state prevailing wage, or using apprenticeship labor. The Washington State Department of Labor and Industries oversees public works requirements. Commerce cannot provide determination to an awardee if these requirements will be required or provide technical assistance on how to comply with the state's public works statutes. For more information about these requirements, please see our program guidelines, and there's contact information in the program guidelines about how to reach out to the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries if you have questions about those requirements. And then finally, we have the state's lead-based paint requirement. I'll now hand this presentation off to Cynthia Sanderson with our lead-based paint program here at Commerce, and she'll explain those requirements to you. Next slide, please.
Okay, my name is Cynthia Sanderson. I'm with the lead-based paint program, and I'm talking about the RRNP rule. If targeted housing and child-occupied facilities that are pre-1978 are subject to this rule. That means when you start hiring a contractor, you will need to make sure they are also RRP certified to do this work. That's easy enough to do. You can contact me and we can, any contractor you're looking at, we can search our database to see if they are RRP certified. And our lead website is www.commerce.wa.gov/lead, and you can find a list of contractors that do this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, and now we're going to turn it over to Olivia Cormier, who's going to talk about the grant program overview. Olivia.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so in the next few slides, I'll give you an overview of the Child Care Minor Renovations funding opportunity, and we'll go over some general information and eligibility for this grant. Next slide. Oh, you were already there. All right, so the Early Learning Facility Program is necessary to support Washington's commitment to provide high quality childcare opportunities for families. Commerce was allocated $10 million for this grant, which comes to us from funds appropriated in the American Rescue Plan Act. We define a project as all the capital work the applicant proposes in their application. The maximum grant award for any one project is $1 million. But please remember that grants will be made for small, medium, and large projects, so you don't need to request a large amount to be competitive. Your project does not need to increase capacity in order to qualify. Matt mentioned this before. This is different from all other ELF grants that require an increase in slots. If your project received a direct appropriation in the 2021-2023 state capital budget, you may still apply for a competitive grant, but not for the same project that received a direct appropriation. Important to remember that Commerce reserves the right to modify grant request amounts based on application demand levels. Next slide. All right, who can apply? So this grant can fund projects sponsored by nonprofits, for-profit businesses, public entities, K-12 school districts, tribes, and religiously affiliated entities. Next slide. Okay, this program is only open to childcare providers who are licensed or certified by the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. That's DCYF. And the license or certification must have been in effect since the start of the pandemic stay-at-home order issued by the governor on March 23rd, 2020. And next, Travis with DCYF will give us a little bit of information regarding licensing and technical assistance that DCYF can provide.
Yes. Hello. Again, my name is Travis Hansen. I'm the Senior Child Care Administrator at DCYF. I oversee the child care licensing programs. We are actually in the process of creating a new unit at the department that will address technical assistance. And so we are just now getting that unit up and running. We hired a supervisor, and so we will see some staff coming into those positions shortly that will provide technical assistance to folks if they have questions around licensing and improvements that they're making to their facility. And so we really encourage folks to reach out early in the process to us and as often to save folks money and time and effort when you're going through remodels and such, or even building a facility. So at the end of this presentation, there is an email to contact us. It's the DCYF. It's a welcome inbox is what we call it. And so if there's questions, please send those questions there so that we can assist you with any questions that you have. Thank you. Thank you, Travis. Appreciate it and appreciate your partnership in this program. Could not do it without you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's transition back then to a little bit more information about grant activities, and specifically what is eligible and what is ineligible, what is considered a minor renovation for purposes of this grant. And for that, I'm going to turn it back over to Olivia.
Thanks. All right. So it is important to note that Commerce can only reimburse for expenses incurred after the date of the award letter. And award letters are anticipated to be sent out by the end of July of this year. Any expenses incurred before the date on that award letter cannot be reimbursed. So this grant can pay for minor renovations, small capital purchases, and planning costs. And we'll go over those in a little bit more detail on the next several slides. Please remember that all work must be completed by licensed and bonded contractors. So on the next several slides, we'll go over eligible and ineligible costs. And again, please refer to the program guidelines on our website for any additional information about eligible project and construction costs. And next is Tanya, who will talk to us a little bit about eligible and ineligible planning expenses.
Thank you, Olivia. So planning costs can include quite a few items, but what's important to remember is that while planning costs are allowable, as long as they result in the renovation of the physical site that is currently operational as a childcare facility. So planning costs that are allowable must be specific to the site where the grant funds will be used. If you apply for this grant and tell us in your scope of work that you'll use the funds only for planning purposes and that no construction activities will be included, your application will be determined ineligible for funding. So while the grant can be used for planning, it also has to be planning that moves the minor renovation project forward. It can't just be for planning costs. Staff will not pre-approve a list of costs that may be eligible or ineligible for your specific scope of work, but we do encourage you to reach out to staff and discuss your scope of work before applying if you have questions that cannot be addressed by reviewing the program guidelines or the frequently asked questions document listed to our ELF webpage. Next slide, please. So again, here is a list of ineligible planning costs. You'll find all of this information in our program guidelines. So we're not going to spend a lot of time today talking specifically about what is and is not an eligible cost, because it's all posted to our website, but we did want to kind of present this to you so that you know where to find it. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this slide includes eligible and ineligible costs related to general project expenses. Please remember that once construction begins, construction project management and observation is eligible for reimbursement. This is on-site management and or supervision of the work site and workers. This does not include work performed by off-site consultants, grant writers, or employees of the grantee, unless the employee is hired solely and specifically to perform on-site construction management. As you can see in the list of ineligible activities, this grant will not fund purchases of new buildings or land or new construction. Next slide. Okay, so furniture. This grant is unable to cover any costs for furniture. Some examples are provided here and include things like tables, chairs, cribs, and mattresses. Next slide.
Pictures are adorable, but not eligible. Sorry.
All right, and like furniture, furnishings are also ineligible. And furnishings include products that are consumed, used up, or discarded after a short period of time. Some examples of furnishings are listed here on this slide. All right, kitchen costs. So this slide includes eligible costs for kitchen projects. But please keep in mind that these are only eligible costs if the kitchen is used to store and prepare snacks or meals for children served at the childcare facility. And here we have some ineligible costs for kitchen projects. Appliances are not eligible, such as the ones listed here. Generally speaking, small kitchen appliances are portable or semi-portable machines used on tabletops, countertops, to accomplish a household task. All right, this list includes eligible and ineligible activities for bathroom renovations. This grant will not cover costs associated with repair or replacement of tubs or showers. And please keep in mind that if the bathroom is not used by the children served or for purposes of childcare on the site, then none of the eligible costs are allowable. Next slide. This grant can be used for replacement of appliances. However, if laundry services specific to childcare are not provided on site, then replacement of the washer and dryer are not an allowable cost. And next, Tanya will speak to us about general building construction costs.
Okay, so as we've covered here, this grant can be used for reimbursement costs. We've been calling those construction costs because that is what happens in a renovation, a remodel is construction. So some general building construction eligible costs you can see here on your screen. This grant may be used for reimbursement of costs related to capital construction and equipment. So all work associated with this grant must be completed by licensed and bonded third-party contractors, and permits must be obtained for all work requiring such oversight. The awardee is not allowed to do any of the work associated with the scope of work themselves. If volunteer labor is used to accomplish the scope of work, management of those volunteers must be conducted by a licensed and bonded person knowledgeable in the work being performed. If materials are donated to the project and go into the construction work associated with the scope of work, those materials must be of a grade and quality that would otherwise be used by licensed and bonded contractors. Again, we'll refer you to the program guidelines for more information on requirements associated with using volunteer labor and donated materials. We encourage grant recipients to use the funds toward materials that are commercial grade, increase the long-term durability and sustainability of the facility, and improve the indoor air quality and health of the building. Next slide, please.
Bonus points for outdoor air quality.
Yeah. Okay, so then a few important points to remember as you are determining the scope of work this grant will be used for. So construction work which changes the load-bearing capacity of the foundation, the walls, or the roofing structures is not allowed. If accessibility issues are addressed at the site, those features must be Americans with Disabilities Act compliant. This is ADA compliant. New construction that builds additions onto an existing building or new structures at the site are not allowed. Temporary structures are not an allowable cost of this grant. Only equipment used at construction sites and that is customarily charged in a third-party contract are allowable costs for this grant. For example, leasing costs of a generator or utilities trailer are allowable costs, but the purchase of hand tools is not an allowable cost. And then finally, purchase or lease of vehicles is not an allowable cost. Next slide, please.
All right. So this slide includes eligible costs for projects that include safety features in the facility. Please keep in mind that any accessibility accommodations must be compliant with ADA requirements, like Tanya said. Also, any installation or replacement of safety systems that require a structural change to the roof or load-bearing wall is not eligible. Next slide. All right, so repair or replacement of building appliances such as water heaters, AC units, and HVAC systems are eligible costs with this grant, But please remember that the building system costs listed here are eligible only as long as structural changes do not occur and load-bearing walls are not affected. Next slide. All right, so this slide includes ineligible costs for building systems. This grant will not reimburse for costs associated with plumbing or rewiring of the entire building, installation of cable or satellite service equipment, or any computer or office equipment. Next slide. Okay, so Tanya will talk to us about outdoor space.
Outdoor space costs are eligible, generally speaking, as long as the use of this grant is for the purpose to improve the safety and accessibility of the outdoor space that the children will use. So as you can see here, there's a list of eligible costs, but again, those costs are related to the safety and the accessibility of the outdoor space. Next slide, please. The grant may not be used to improve the curb appeal or aesthetic of the outdoor space surrounding the childcare site or the parking area. The grant may also not be used to build structures on the site for storage purposes. Toys, outdoor educational materials, and physical education equipment are not allowed uses of this grant. And again, so staff will not pre-approve a list of costs that may be eligible or ineligible for your scope of work, but we do encourage you to reach out to us and discuss your scope of work before applying if you have questions that cannot be addressed by reviewing the program guidelines or the frequently asked questions document on our webpage. Thank you.
Okay, community investment. On this slide, we'll talk about prioritization of certain projects. It is important to note that Commerce Early Learning Facilities grants are awarded through a competitive application process. Please keep in mind that the applications will be scored, and in order to align funding with federal priorities, providers who show that they meet any of the criteria listed on this slide will score extra points on their application. In your application responses, please be as thorough as possible. Do not assume that the person reading and scoring the application knows anything about your project. Next slide. All right, here's a timeline for the program, starting with the opening of the application on March 3rd through when awards are anticipated to be announced in July. The pre-application questions must be submitted by 4 p.m. on April 19th, and the general application questions must be received by 4 p.m. on May 3rd. These are Pacific Standard Time, and any application that doesn't meet these two deadlines will not be considered for funding. It'd be a good idea to submit your application questions before 4 p.m. so that you have time to address any technological issues that may come up. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to go over the online application process. The only way to apply for this grant is through the ZoomGrants platform. If you do not already have a ZoomGrants account, you can go to www.zoomgrants.com to set up a new account. For current users, click on the Login button to get started. And for new users, click on the Sign Up Now button to get a new account. Next slide. So once you have an account and you can log in, this is what you'll see. You're going to click on the ELF Federal Child Care Minor Renovation Grant link to get started. For ZoomGrants technical assistance, there will be some contact information on the last slide of this presentation. Okay, so in ZoomGrants, there are 5 tabs that must be completed before submitting your application. Tab 1 includes basic information concerning your organization and project, including contact information and other pertinent data. Tab 2 includes the pre-application questions and addresses the licensing and certification status and the facility location. Tab 3 is for general application questions about your project. Tab 4 is where you list your budget. As a reminder, when listing your project budget, please use eligible costs only. This will be different from your total project budget and includes only capital costs that this grant can reimburse. Again, for more information about what costs are eligible, please refer to the program guidelines. And on tab 5, please save forms or documents on your computer, complete, and then upload to ZoomGrants using the upload button provided. All documents required for your project must be completed and submitted with the application. Failure to provide the requested documentation or providing inaccurate information may result in the proposal receiving less points or being disqualified. Next slide. And here is the budget screen in ZoomGrants. Budgets that outline the project's sources of funds and uses of funds are a required part of the application. The sources of funds table is a breakdown of capital funding for facility completion. This table includes the ELF program grant amount you are requesting, along with all other funding sources. There are 2 columns to this table. So column 1 is specific to the funding needed to complete the project scope of work as indicated in the application. This will include the ELF grant amount requested, as well as any other funding needed to complete the scope of work. Column 2 is specific to any other additional funding needed to complete work associated with the early learning facility that is not identified in the scope of work of the application. This is work that will happen simultaneous to the work being completed as outlined in the scope of work. We want to know the funding sources associated with completing the early learning facility so that it will be operational. Please do not include the grant amount requested in this column. You do not need to complete column 2 if there is no other work that will occur at the site for it to be operational. All right, next slide. The uses of funds table is a breakdown of capital and related equipment costs. There are 2 columns to this table. Column number 1 is specific to the funding needed to complete the scope of work as indicated in the application. The total cost will either be equal to the grant amount requested if there is no other funding needed to complete the project, or equal to the total of column number 1 in the sources of funds table above if there are additional sources needed to complete the scope of work. Column number 2 is specific to any other additional cost to complete work associated with the early learning facility that is not identified in the scope of work. This is work that will happen simultaneous to the work being completed as outlined in the scope of work. All right, next slide. So now we're going to go over documents that are required as part of an application. Site control documents may include a deed if the applicant owns the real property, or a lease if the applicant does not own the real property, as Tanya brought up before. Funding sources identified in column 1 and 2 on the budget tab must be substantiated by uploading documentation that either shows the funds are committed, or if funds are not committed, provide a plan and timeline for getting funds committed. If you don't have funding committed at the time of application, you can upload a plan for securing the rest of the funds. If the grant is the only source of funding, upload a document indicating there are no other funds needed to complete the scope of work. There are some optional documents that you may include. A letter from the parent organization if the applicant organization is a subsidiary or a subcontractor for another organizations. This can indicate the support for the project. And then letters of support from any community organization and an operating plan. Next slide. All right, we are at the question and answer time. Please, if you have not already done so, write your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to as many questions as possible in the time we have. And again, if we don't get to your question today, we are available by email or phone.
Okay, Kristen, are we ready to start with the questions?
Yes, and we have about 65.
Okay.
So I'm going to start so just keep in mind, while I am going through these, I won't be able to put the other ones in the queue. I'll have to wait till we get down to the end and then I'll pop them in. So, and those that are duplicative, I'm only putting in once if I can catch that. So that way we'll save some time there. So first one, will the previous construction grant winners be announced before the next grant needs to be written?
I am assuming that's the state funding round that you're referencing, and we are aiming to get award letters out in early April, if not sooner.
Will there be a recording of this webinar provided later?
Absolutely. The webinar, the PowerPoint slides, those will be posted to that webpage that I showed everyone at the beginning of the presentation.
You need to be a nonprofit to apply.
Nonprofits, for-profits, public entities, and K-12 school districts and tribes are all eligible to apply for this funding.
Is this also for home childcare?
Yes.
As long as they're licensed.
Yes, as long as they're licensed.
Is this one, I'm assuming it was a typo, is the ELK, but I put in parentheses ELF grant still available?
Can you repeat that, please?
Is the ELK grant still available? I'm assuming they meant ELF, and I'm thinking it's eligible organizations, but.
The Early Learning Facilities state-funded application closed. We are currently reviewing the applications and will make funding decisions towards the end of the month, with the award letters going out in April. This presentation is for the federal funding for minor renovations through the Early Learning Facilities program. That application opens on March 3rd.
We have multiple programs. They are all fully licensed with DCIF or DCYF. One of them is a school age program. Since this site is fully licensed, would it be eligible for the grant?
Licensed school-based programs are eligible for the grant.
We transport our students to ECAP developmental preschool in our district. Can grant funds be used for vehicle repair or purchase?
No.
Grant funds cannot be used for vehicle purchase, vehicle repair. Pretty much any operating costs similar to that cannot be used for the grant.
Some of these renovations have been planned for a while and require purchase of materials or deposits in advance. Are costs only eligible to be reimbursed if they are incurred after funding? Or if we had to purchase equipment today but not funded until August, could we still submit those for reimbursement after August?
No, costs are only reimbursable after the award letter date, and award letters will go out sometime in August, I believe.
Yes, that's our goal. And if we have a lot of applications, we may need a little bit more time to review, but that's our sort of best guess at this point.
Will this apply to expanding our bathroom with 2 additional toilets? And will it cover installing sinks in the bathrooms? Or installing sinks in the classrooms, sorry.
As long as the expansion does not change any of the structural features of the building, those costs should be eligible. So for example, you can't remove load-bearing walls. You couldn't remove joists in your flooring in order to change your plumbing so you could add a toilet. So it really all hinges on whether or not you are changing the load-bearing capacity of the building.
Can this grant be used to enclose an existing patio that we want to use for a preschool area?
That's a good question. We had not thought about that. I think we're going to have to get back to that question.
Okay, and I'll highlight this. Also, I'm seeing a lot of questions popping up in the chat, and I've mentioned a few times, Zoom will not allow me to copy and paste from the chat into the Q&A. So if they have questions in the chat, they need to put them into the Q&A.
We should be able to capture the chat questions when we post our FAQ. So we may not be able to get to those chat questions today, but we will make every attempt to answer these questions in our FAQ that will be posted to our webpage. What else do we have, Kristen?
All right, I just want to make sure that we weren't ignoring them. Will a temporary license dated in 2019 qualify?
So the requirement is that the facility was licensed as of March 23rd, 2020. I think we would need to talk to DCYF about their temporary licensing protocols. So we'll have to get back to that question.
Tanya, do you want me to, maybe I can ask a follow-up question. Are they talking about a temporary or initial? Because if it's an initial, that would be considered they're licensed, right? So we don't do temporary license. So I'm wondering,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm seeing in the chat, Travis, it's initial license.
Yep. Then yes, then they have a license.
Okay, so as long as you are initially licensed by March 23rd, 2020, this you're eligible to apply for this grant opportunity.
Are ECAP only sites eligible to apply?
This funding isn't specific to ECAP or Working Childcare Connections. So as long as you are a licensed or certified childcare facility, you're eligible to apply.
Can family daycare facilities use this grant to replace carpet and flooring?
Yes, as long as you do not change the structural components of the flooring, you can replace hard flooring or carpet.
Good timing. We just talked about that one.
Uh-huh.
I think we had a plan on that question.
We had a robust debate about
We did.
very exciting.
We did. I'm glad it was worthwhile.
And this is a follow-up that I moved forward because it's linked to the previous. I am a child care provider for 15 years and I would like to renovate my daycare flooring. How much do you think you can help me finance the work?
So the maximum award amount is $1 million. You would need to consult a contractor in regard to what replacing your flooring would potentially cost you, but you could apply for up to $1 million with this grant opportunity.
Yeah, an excellent point. And bids or estimates are required to be uploaded too. So that would be something you'd want to make sure to attach in your document section once you got that information. That's right in ZoomGrants on the documents tab, you'll see it.
Can this funding be used to buy and upgrade another facility that is licensed and has been for years?
No, this funding round is not open to acquisition of property.
Can we get a generator system for when our power goes out? We live in a high wind area.
It's a good question. The grant funds are supposed to be specific to the child care facility, so I think we need to look a little bit more into that question.
Alrighty. Can we start the minor renovation before we get the grant?
You can start your minor renovation before you are awarded our grant, but only costs after the award date will be eligible with the funding.
I have had my child care preschool in Woodinville since 1988. I am on a well and septic system. My septic system has failed. The county is talking perhaps needing a 100,000 system. This could be the end of my school. Would I be eligible?
Yes, as long as you are a licensed child care provider and the site is licensed through DCYF, those would be eligible costs.
When does the application close?
Olivia, when does the application close?
That would be May 3rd.
Thank you.
And pre-application questions, April 19th, 4
Yes.
p.m. Remember to turn those in. If you miss that cutoff, you can't submit the full application. And like Olivia mentioned, we recommend you submit at least a few minutes early. So if there's any sort of technological glitch, it gets submitted by the April 19th deadline and then the May 3rd deadline for the full application.
What if we are tribal licensed?
You are eligible for this funding.
Does building purchase qualify for this grant?
No, acquisition of property does not qualify for this grant.
Will this involve renovating playgrounds?
Outdoor play spaces are eligible, certain costs. So playground equipment is eligible, fencing that surrounds the play area that the children use is eligible. Fall mitigation is eligible. So I recommend taking a look at the program guidelines, and it outlines what is and is not eligible for the outdoor play area.
Program guidelines state, quote, awards must make their best effort to maintain and operate the facility, unquote. How is best effort determined? What are and who are the members of the early learning scoring committee?
So awardees will be asked to make their best effort to maintain and operate the facility through the contract term. The contract term will be December 31, 2024. So if you get one of these grants, we do ask that you maintain your licensure, you continue operating as a child care facility through that December 31st, 2024 date. Best efforts, that's a good question around that word. We haven't defined it. So, you know, ideally we will be having conversations with folks if they're not able to meet that best effort in maintaining operations. At this time, we don't have a hard definition of what that would look like.
If a minor improvement such as repair and painting the interior walls of the child care center is all that the funding is requested for, is there still DAP necessary?
So we typically require all projects to go through the DAP and the tribal coordination. And we do this because if you are potentially changing a building that is 45 years or older, there also needs to be a cultural review by DAP. So we would need to have a conversation with the awardee about what specifically that work would look like in the age of the building before we could really determine that.
If a minor renovation said, I've already got that one. If my project is not going to reflect an increase of enrollment and capacity, can we still apply for the grant?
Yes, an increase in capacity is not required for this federal funding opportunity.
If I have two buildings under one license, can they both be renovated with this grant?
You can apply for multiple sites. We are asking with this funding round that each site has a separate application. So you would need to submit an application for one site. You would need to submit a second application for the second site if you have projects at both sites.
Can one childcare provider apply for these funds to be used to purchase and renovate another provider's home daycare?
No.
No purchasing buildings.
Yep. And then somebody said, what was the email again, question mark? And this was entered after Travis's part. And I did put the DCYF website in the chat. So I don't know what the email question was about. So
Okay.
I'm kind of I'll skip over that.
So we do have on our early learning facilities webpage, we have email contacts specific to DCYF. I don't believe we have Travis's email specific to DCYF. Let me see.
The one he mentioned is on the last slide of this presentation.
Yeah, the welcome email. And I think I answered that back to that person that asked that question as well.
Okay, so for anyone else wondering, contact information is on the last slide of this presentation. There's also contact information listed on our webpage. And then if you reach out directly to us, we would be happy to try and connect you to whoever needs to be contacted at DCYF.
I received the DCYF license in November of 2020. Does that imply I cannot apply?
I'm sorry, Kristen, can you repeat that?
I received the DCYF license in November of 2020. Does that imply that I cannot apply?
That would be correct. You would have had to have been licensed by March 23rd of 2020.
Current. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm just going to read exactly what they said because I'm not following the question. It says Travis current licensed providers should work directly with our current licensor or the new person / group TA question mark.
They should work with their current licensor right now. And as soon as we have those other PA staff on, we'll get their contact information up on the website, and maybe we can even blast something out to folks to communicate that those folks are on. But right now I work currently with your assigned licensor.
Thank you very much. Would window replacement fit the grant criteria?
Yes, you can use the grant funds to replace your windows as long as it does not change the structural load-bearing components of your walls.
Can I have more than one thing to consider for renovation?
Yes.
We are an ECAP program ran by a K-12 and license exempt. Can we qualify?
Yes.
March 23rd, 2020 start for the DCYF license. Is it for interim or permanent? And I believe he answered that there is no interim, that it is the license. So it.
If you had your initial DCYF license by the March 23rd, 2020 date, you are eligible for these funds.
We were licensed in a different location during the pandemic and had to move locations. We are now in a new location under the new license. Can we still apply?
So Travis, we had this conversation and I'm not remembering where we landed. Are they still licensed with the same site license?
No, that is actually a new license because it's a new site is what it is.
So unfortunately, in that particular scenario, you would not be eligible for these funds.
Okay, you just answered that one, so I can take this one off. Can you provide some examples for proof of commitment of other funding for the project completion? For instance, does that mean a letter from the center director?
Yeah, so if it's a large project, or even if it's a small project, and if there is more funding needed than the ELF grant to cover the costs associated with the project, what we're looking for with the funding commitment is, for example, a letter from the lender indicating that you have applied and they are considering your loan request. If you have applied for a grant, a letter from that granting entity indicating that you have applied and that your request is going to be funded. If you're going to do a fundraising campaign, we would want to see what you have raised to date and what your plan is to continue raising funds to meet your goal. We've seen letters from donors who, maybe you have a large donor who hasn't given you the funds yet, but they're going to give you the funds. We would need to see a letter from them indicating that they've committed those funds. If your organization is going to use your own reserve account funding, we would need to see either a letter from your board or from your executive management indicating that that funding is specifically available for this capital project. Anybody else have any ideas?
No, I think that captures it very well. Yeah, thank you.
What about a water heater?
What about a water heater?
I'm assuming they want to know if it's covered.
We all love our water heaters. Yes, they are eligible.
I love it. Would replacing a roof be acceptable?
You can do minor repairs to a roof. You can do, you can replace the roofing materials as long as it does not replace the structural components of the roof. Roofs are tricky with this grant because it might look like you just need to replace the shingles, but then once you get the shingles off, all of a sudden the sheeting and the roofing joists are rotten, and now you've dove into your structure, and we could not give you money with this grant to replace the structural components. So we really do caution people in using this grant for roofing purposes.
Do you need to be a facility that serves low-income families to qualify for this grant?
No.
No, you do not.
And high school ECAP programs with licenses apply?
Yes, as long as you're a licensed childcare facility.
Is the license eligibility of March 23, 2020 at the provider or site level?
It is at the site level.
Please clarify if Must be, yeah, we've already addressed that. Must be opened prior to March 2020 to apply. So yes, that was addressed. We addressed roofing. We addressed purchasing and building. If we want to increase the safety of our children with a card entry access system, will that be allowable cost?
Yes.
What about synthetic or turf grass?
I do believe we've indicated that grass seeding is allowable. Hadn't thought about turf. I don't know why it would not be, because it's the same thing as grass, just a different product. I'm seeing some nodding heads, so I think
would
we can
agree.
agree to that.
Yep.
I think we can agree to that.
I totally agree. Yep. I think you're right.
And can we have multiple projects such as new flooring, roof repair, and fixing chairs on the same application?
So repair of furniture would not be eligible. Again, the repair of the roof, the repair would be eligible, but if once you got into the repair of the roof and there was structural damage, the grant funds could not be used to repair that structural damage.
And stairs.
Stairs are eligible. Stairs are eligible as long as you have not changed the structural component of the building.
Can we replace all appliances, or can we get reimbursed for all appliances we replaced last year?
No, unfortunately, the grant funds can only be used moving forward from the date of the award letter, which will be sometime in August of this year.
Is purchasing a diaper changing table eligible?
Furniture is not, furniture and furnishings are not eligible with this grant fund.
Is fireplace safety eligible?
I guess that would depend on what was being done to make the fireplace more safe. If you were purchasing, we would need more details about that, I think, to make a determination on that.
Okay. Can we be reimbursed for the cost of a new fence that we just put up this month for the outdoor play area?
No, unfortunately, we can only reimburse for costs incurred after the award letter date, again, which will be in August.
Will there be any help available on writing the scope of work to ensure that need is communicated properly?
So at this time, early learning facilities staff cannot help grantees answer their questions. We can discuss the application. We can help you orient to how to access ZoomGrants. We can try to explain the questions. We unfortunately cannot help you write your answer to those questions. We do recommend, if you are already associated with Child Care Aware and you have a coach, to work with them. We have heard that they can potentially assist you in completing your grant application. We're also working currently with our partner DCYF to determine if there's any resources available through DCYF to be able to help with completing grant applications. And we have not 100% secured that yet, so no promises there. So at this time, grantees have to be able to complete their applications themselves.
What about
Tanya,
taking,
and I'd just add to that, like we mentioned in the, webinar, don't assume when you're writing the scope of work that anybody knows anything about the project And I think generally speaking, you know, the more details and the more information you can provide to really paint a picture for the reviewers about what you're proposing to use the grant funds for is generally going to help. So if we did have sort of high level guidance, I think that would be it.
And if you're already working with a contractor, they should be able to help you kind of pare down, you know, what is the project that you're applying for. So if you're working with somebody now, they certainly can help you with that language for the scope of work in particular.
How about taking out septic system and connecting to city sewer?
These funds cannot be used for that type of infrastructure.
Is the grant offered for one big project or multiple small projects?
Either or. You can, the way that this application is structured is you can apply for a large project at a specific site. You can apply for a small project at a specific site. If you have multiple childcare sites that you apply for, then you would need to submit an individual application for each of those childcare sites. If you are thinking about submitting multiple applications for the same site, technically you could do that. I think we would encourage you to make one application for that entire site. You'd probably be more competitive.
Considering summer is primary time for facilities to make renovations, it's a shame that costs cannot be incurred before the end of July. Is the end of July date for award letters something that cannot happen by the end of June so that ELF can have summer to work on it?
Yeah, unfortunately, at this time, the way that this program has been developed, the costs will have to have been incurred after the award letter date in order to be eligible.
Can school districts apply for this grant if they have school day and half-day classrooms?
Yes.
Can more than one project, larger project like roof and sprinkler system be applied for in one request? Because we have many projects that would qualify. Is it best to apply as one or focus on projects that group together under one theme?
So the maximum award request is $1 million. You can apply for as many projects at a single site up to that $1 million mark. We would recommend making one application per site. And so it will probably work out that multiple projects will be included in that application.
Regarding Zoom grants, will collaborators be allowed to view the application? Also, side note, I logged into Zoom grants today and it said they had a data breach in January of 22 and I should reset my password.
Yes, if you have previously used ZoomGrants and you have login credentials, they did experience a data breach. And so when you if you haven't logged in since January, you will be asked to change your password. We have used the collaborator function in ZoomGrants before, and I will go back in to make sure that it is turned on for this funding round.
Are the requirements listed at the beginning, the ones without the slides, determined during the pre-application phase or after the awards have been announced?
So the requirements apply to all projects that are funded. So if you receive an award through this grant, all of the requirements that were explained during the presentation will apply to your project. take a look at the program guidelines. There are other requirements than what we covered in the webinar. We covered kind of the big ones that folks want to know about as they're designing their scope of work and thinking about their project. So do take a look at the program guidelines, but all of those program guidelines apply to all funded awardees.
Initial question answered, but a question arises on the scheduling. So the project cannot start until grants are awarded in July. I need to have my project done by then. It's a dream field.
You can start your project prior to receiving an award. We cannot reimburse for costs incurred except for those incurred after the award date. So the award letter will be sent out in August. If you start your project prior to receiving that award letter, the costs that you've incurred prior to receiving that award letter would not be reimbursed by this program.
Do you have to stay open a certain amount of years to qualify for this grant?
No, so we, unlike the state ELF program, we do not have a long-term commitment period. So for some folks who are familiar with our state funding round, we have anywhere from a 10, 15 to 20-year commitment period, depending on the year you were funded in. That does not apply to this funding round. What we are asking is that awardees make their best efforts to maintain and operate their facility through the contract term, and that contract term will end on December 31st, 2024. So we don't have that long-term commitment like the state funded program does, but we do ask that you make best efforts to operate as a childcare facility until December 31st, 2024.
How do we know how much funding to shoot for? Will there be an outline or budget given?
That is completely up to you as the project proponent. We do recommend that you work with contractors to get estimates on costs associated with the work that needs to be done at your facility. And again, the maximum award is $1 million.
Yeah, well said. And I can just also echo, and partly to give you a break, Tanya, thank you for answering all these, doing fabulous. We're going to aim to award projects of different sizes, so we don't have all our awards going to larger projects for $1 million or all of our awards going to small projects for $50,000. So there's not really a strategic advantage one way or the other, and that's why we tried to set it up like that. So like Tanya said, looking at what work you have to do, looking at bids or estimates, and then using that to sort of guide what you think is best for your particular project proposal.
And I think this is more of a comment than a question. This is a lot of work for smaller organizations to complete to even be considered for the grant. It would have been helpful if this webinar was held at least a few weeks before the portal opened. It feels like the funds will be directed toward larger organizations that are well staffed and able to jump through these various hoops.
Well,
and
go ahead, Tanya. Yeah.
The application materials have been posted to our webpage for a couple of weeks now. And so if you did not know that, the materials have been available to review. Yes, we would like to be able to put these webinars out sooner than often we can, and we also need to be able to develop the program. So here we are today. Hopefully this is proving informative. And then as Matt explained, we are planning to award funding in different funding tiers. So the intention is not to fund all large projects. In my stating that the maximum award is $1 million, that's for planning purposes. You can apply up to $1 million, but we will have different funding tiers so that small projects can also be competitive in this funding round.
And I should have mentioned too, we're also going to look at organization type. So in addition to giving awards by level of request, we're also going to divide our awards by provider type to ensure that the smaller family homes have equitable chance of accessing these funds along with centers. So we're working to ensure that the small providers and the small awards are all going to be well represented with these funds.
We will compare, when we do our application review, we do compare like applications to like applications. So a small project for, $50,000 is not going to go up against a project with $1 million budget.
As an LLC, I have a lease agreement with myself as the homeowner. So do I have to provide the lease agreement or the deed?
If you're applying as the childcare provider and the childcare provider is the LLC, then you can provide the lease. If you are licensed as the homeowner, then we would want to see the deed. So kind of depends.
Good question.
Okay, and this is more of a helpful comment. I am seeing the following information in ZoomGrants when trying to sign up. If you find when you find a funding organization that uses ZoomGrants, the funder will provide a link to its own ZoomGrants page where you can create an account from which you submit your own applications. ZoomGrants does not list or provide links to programs on our website or through technical support desk. The funding organization is the only entity that can share this links to their programs. So I think what she's saying is, well, she saw that when she was trying to sign up.
So we have not, Kristen, we have not released the ZoomGrants link to the application yet. That will be posted on our webpage on the opening date of the application, which is March 3rd. So once that link goes live, you can click on that link and it'll take you directly to the application page on ZoomGrants. So you can go through the ZoomGrants general website page today and get an account. You won't have access to the ELF specific application until that March 3rd date, or you can wait until March 3rd when the application link will be posted to our webpage. You can click that link directly and it'll take you to ZoomGrants where you can also set up an account and then access the application. So if you've never used ZoomGrants before, you can start today or you can wait until March 3rd.
And I'll just note too, we're at 2. So I know this was our end of our scheduled time. I think we can stay on for a few more minutes, maybe 2:10. But want to encourage folks, if they still have questions out there, to put those in the Q&A. And if we can't get to them in the next 10 minutes, we will write up responses and post those on our website.
Thanks, Matt.
And then also, Matt, before we exit today, I think we have to save the chat before you exit out and close it. So I want to make sure we get the chat saved because there are a lot of questions in the chat that I wasn't able to get.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, let's stay on after and try to do that.
All right. So
what else do we have?
Can grants be used for upgrading fire extinguisher systems?
Yes, so fire safety systems are an eligible cost as long as you don't have to remove structural load-bearing walls. Sometimes, depending on the fire system that you're proposing, so sprinklers sometimes need to go through the roofing structures. And so if you're dealing with your load-bearing joists in your roof, these funds could not be used for that. If you're going through load-bearing walls, these funds could not be used for that. So it kind of depends on the fire safety system. If it's just for fire extinguishers, yes.
Okay, so this is similar to another question. How do we apply for more than one project?
So
and that's the different applications. If it's for a different site, like Tanya mentioned, if you want to include multiple projects at the same site, as long as it's within $1 million, that can be within one application. If it's different projects at different sites, then we ask that you submit a different application for each site.
We have been asked to move to another location on the same site. can this funding be used to renovate that new space?
Is Travis still with us? I think as long as your site license moves to that same space, we could do that. I'm not 100% sure that you would be allowed to do that through DCYF. So that would be something that we would have to talk to DCYF about.
Yeah, that might be a good offline question.
And one thing that would not be allowable would be the moving costs. So if the grant funds could fund the renovation, that's possible. I think we need to talk to DCYF about that, but we could not move we could not cover any of the costs associated with the move to a new site.
Do we need to have a contractor for the budget?
You do not need to hire somebody to develop the budget. It would be a good idea if you start working with construction contractors so that you have a well-developed budget for your project.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a comment, I'm not sure what it is. All it says is not allowing to sign up directly.
So if you're speaking to ZoomGrants, that would be correct. You cannot sign up for the application as of yet because it is not live until March 3rd. You can go into the ZoomGrants website and establish an account. So if that's what that question is speaking to, that hopefully is the answer to it.
Okay, the next one could you review letters of support and operating plan again, please? I didn't understand it.
So letters of support are an optional document. What that could look like is letters from community organizations who support your childcare facility. If you're looking to expand childcare services, it could be where you're going to get your childcare referrals from. You could get a letter from them. If you're not expanding your childcare services and you're just remodeling your facility, do your neighbors support it? Would they write a letter? These are optional documents, so you don't have to spend a lot of time getting those kinds of documents in order. But they're nice to see that you have support from the community.
Is there a deadline to spend the grant funds?
Yes. So the contract term again is December 31, 2024. The funds need to be expended by that date. And we have a date, which is not coming to mind. Olivia, do you remember the date that they have to submit their reimbursement request by, the last date?
I think it's sometime in August, but
August 31, yeah,
Okay.
2024.
So for Commerce, we have a deadline of when we have to have the funds expended, which means we need time to process all of that. So for the grantee, it sounds like you will have until August 31st to submit costs for reimbursement of 2024.
Are kitchen cabinets eligible?
Kitchen cabinets are eligible as long as your kitchen is used for snack prep, meal prep, food storage related to the childcare facility.
Let's just do a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. And also a good reminder, if you have a question, pop it into the chat and we will respond via our online FAQ.
Thanks, Matt.
Do you or should you have contractor quotes to put on the application?
Yes, you will need to submit at least an estimate of the costs associated with the project that you're proposing in your scope of work. So again, we recommend that you start working with contractors. They should be able to provide you estimates. You don't have to have final bids to apply for this funding, but you do need to be able to submit cost estimates.
Can it be used to replace AC or central air units?
Yes.
Can you give an example of the two columns in the budget?
Well, an example of, let me see. Okay, so in the sources of funds budget in ZoomGrants, the ELF grant goes in column 1. So whatever you're applying for through this program for the ELF grant, you would put in the first field of column 1. And then if there's any other funds necessary to complete the scope of work, you'd also include those funds in column 1. So say, for example, you're applying for $100,000 from the ELF program. That $100,000 would go in column 1, but your scope of work is going to cost $150,000 to complete, and you are going to use your own personal savings, so $50,000 of your own personal savings. That $50,000 would also go in column 1. Column 2 is more oriented to bigger capital facility renovations. So if anything is necessary outside of your scope of work, that's what would go in column 2. So you've got your $150,000 project, and you've got your grant in column 1, you've got your own personal savings of $50,000 in column 1, and then say, for example, you're going to replace your roof, and you're not going to use the grant funds to replace your roof, and the roof is going to cost you $40,000 to replace. We would want to see that those $40,000 are committed in column 2. So that's specific to the sources of funds budget. And then related to the uses of funds budget, very similarly, column 1, all of the costs associated with that $150,000 scope of work would go in column 1, and then all of the costs associated with the roof, the $40,000 that's not going to be covered by the grant, would go in column 2. We don't imagine a lot of projects are going to use column 2, but we wanted to make it available just in case there were big projects out there that were going to kind of go beyond the scope of work being proposed with this ELF grant. So for most applicants, column 1 is going to be sufficient. You complete column 1.
Can you show the website navigation again?
Let's just because of time, thank you, Kristen. Let's cut it off there. We'll get all the other questions that folks have asked saved in the chat, and then we will work on answering those and put them up on our website. And we also on the screen have our Commerce Early Learning Facilities inbox. That's the email to send questions that you have directly to, and somebody will respond. We also have the contact information for ZoomGrants there. And then, as Travis mentioned, DCYF has a welcome inbox, and that is the email to send questions that are more general in nature for DCYF. So again, thank you all for coming today and your interest. We will post this webinar recording along with the slides to our website in the coming days, and we will start working on that FAQ document from all the good questions folks had today. and we will have answers to those and put those up on our website very soon too. And take a look one more time with the emails there if you have any other questions. Thank you all very much, and we hope to talk to you soon. Bye.